James and Matt, not to introduce myself, because I'm going to do that really briefly. And this is really to kind of explain or maybe even excuse the quite complicated lens through which I see football. It's not just about violence. So I want to kind of set that in context, and I'll do that, given the age in which we live, I'll do that using my Twitter profile. So I started in football performance. I played the game for a pro club for a couple of years. I was involved as a scout and an analyst and a coach, and I worked in the States for a few years from kind of age 18 onwards. And after I came back from America, I got a job working for Liverpool, and I became involved in some programs which we might frame in academic terms as sport for development. So it wasn't about elite development, it was about sport for development, using sport as a vehicle to promote different forms of social advancement in different parts of the world. I run the sport business management space at University of Central Lancashire in the UK, so I tend to talk about business interest a bit more than cultural. I'll try and change that for today, given the audience. I'm obviously a Liverpoolian. If you're not used to the Scouse accent, this is as posh as I can possibly be. So I'll try and maintain that for the duration. I'm a red, obviously. Given the photo here, I could only claim to be. So I had a column on a football website based in Japan for 10 years, and I've written for a number of broadsheets and more recently sites like the Anfield Rap. But I also make films, and I'm going to show 7 minutes of a film that I made at the end of the session, and I make all of them on an iPhone. And I'll explain why I do that throughout this session. And I first met Martin and James when they invited me over to the Football Collective Conference in 2017, and I showed a film of mine, Sarajevo Derby, which was another iPhone film. So I did a PhD in hooliganism from 2003 to 6-7 at the University of Liverpool, and I don't really work in that space or research in that space since, but because I did my PhD in that area, I occasionally get dragged into arguments trying to explain to popular audiences why football violence happens, and I get invitations like this to come and speak to groups. So I still kind of dabble in the academic side of football fandom, but I am, to answer your question, I am a Liverpool fan, and although I live a bit further north now, I live in the Lake District. I took my photo of my bedroom window yesterday. It's pretty snowy where I've just left. But I watch a lot of football in a lot of grounds, in a lot of places. That was my 2-year-old being dragged around, literally, she's close to tears in that picture, being dragged around the stadium in Gran Canaria last month. And I've watched a lot of football and a lot of mega events, and the Euros this summer will be the 20th, and when I had got to 150 countries, my wife, who's Irish, I think she was really taking the piss out of me when she made me a cake celebrating that fact. But a lot of travel to a lot of places, and I'll try and bring a few stories together from different places later in the presentation, but I'm going to focus to begin with on English fan culture. So I'm going to start with quite a sensitive photo, and if you Google Sophia hooligans, this is one of the first images that you'll see. So here you've got 2 young lads. We can guess that they might be kind of around 12, 13. They've both got kind of key makes. They've both got kind of almost militarised clothing, and obviously nothing on the top half. And you've got celebrations in English of criminality, of Nazism, of hooliganism, and this says CAB. Does anyone know if there's a letter missing? Anyone know what that letter might be? A. ACAB 1312. All cops are bastards. And these 2 young lads are schooled in a culture in which there is an anti-police, an anti-just about everything, from legal conduct to Jewish people, etc. They're schooled in this kind of environment. And you might remember in the press from 2019, there was a quite high-profile match in both England and Bulgaria, and there were a number of kind of Nazi salutes from some of the fans. And it made the press throughout Europe, and people were asking questions about whether football is still a space for this kind of expression. So today I'm going to talk about quite a few things, so I hope you don't mind if I kind of rattle through a number of different topics today. I'm going to talk about the significance of football. There might be people in the room that don't know anything about it or don't even like it. I make documentaries, and my sister, who's married to a TV producer, says that the sign of a good documentary is you can watch it and not care about the subject area. So I'm hoping that if football isn't your thing, I'm hoping there's things you can take away, and if not, then there's always something to look at, because I'm quite pictographic in how I teach. So after I talk about the significance of football, I'm going to kind of frame it within social identity, talk a bit about some methods of collecting data and disseminating findings. Then I'm going to frame it in how football's changed in terms of rivalry, violence, hooliganism, and how it's been responded to as a phenomenon. Then there'll be some kind of key questions and implications which will link back to some of the things that Martin's asked me to talk to you about today, and then a case study on Bulgaria. So all this is the UK, and then we're going to go to the Balkans for the case study. So I took this photo at Windermere Station 2 days ago, which is a train station close to where I live, and here you can see evidence of where football is often perceived to sit, just within the context of the of the entertainment industry. It's just something else that you might watch on TV. And for the majority of people who consume football around the world, that's the means through which they do it. They're not going to stadiums to watch matches, they're watching on TV. But one of the reasons they watch on TV is not just the product on the pitch, but the atmosphere that's created around it in the stands. Now this is the capital city of the most secretive country on earth. This is Pyongyang in North Korea, and just over my right shoulder you can see a football stadium. And if you look on the list of biggest sports stadiums in the world, the top 10, I think 8 of them are American collegiate stadiums, but number 1, if you believe Wikipedia as a source, the number 1 is the stadium in Pyongyang. Now I don't know anyone who's verified the number of seats, but allegedly it holds 150,000. Now you can just see at the top, I'll make it clearer from this image, you can just see a couple of images, portraits of the great leaders of North Korea. And if you go in any public building in North Korea, you will see the great leaders. You will also see symbols of their heritage and their connection to nuclear weaponry. And you'll also see pictures of the under-17s and under-20s Women World Cup winning team. They're so proud of their achievements. And even North Korea play football, and even North Korea has possibilities for people to go and experience North Korean culture through football. It's one of the only kind of vehicles for exchange from that point of view. So it is a universal game. It's not played everywhere, and it's not always called football. There are places where they have a more dominant national variant of the game. I would argue that we're in one at the moment. Certainly the United States of America and Australia will be as well. And it also helps people connect. Now this is a project that I worked on in Israel in 2006, and John Sugden, who's a prof at the University of Brighton, who was running the project, he's written on the pacifist potential of football. Now here you have a Jewish lad and an Arab lad. I don't have to point out which one's which. Now that programme is value-based, so the kids are taught, they might live on the same street but they have a different faith, they have a different language, different culture, they might be brought up to think of the other as the enemy. So we bring them together through a value-based coaching programme, and at the end of that 2 weeks they play a 6-a-side tournament, and on each team there's 3 Arabs and 3 Jews. So the Arab must rely on Jew in order to be successful in a common venture. So it helps teach them to see the value of each other. So you have programmes, and I've worked on 30 of these projects across the world, and wrote a book on this about 10 years ago, which have a kind of positive look at football, if you like. Now if you look at this headline, which was from earlier this month, Old Firm racism charge for 12-year-old boy. Now we wouldn't necessarily associate Glasgow Celtic with this kind of headline, and that shows the danger really of using headlines as representative of a collective and of a club and of a farmland. But it does also point to the fact that there are occasions in which violence has had a relationship with football. Does anyone know what this mural relates to, or where it's based? If you can see from where you are.
Boban keeping the cop, is it?
That's Boban, yeah. So you can just see a date, it's the 13th of May 1990 at the Maximir Stadium in Zagreb. Now during this era, Yugoslavia, which was the state at the time, were probably the best for football. So Red Star Belgrade won the European Cup in 1991, but every single match between a Serbian team and a Croatian team or a Bosnian team, these were domestic football matches within a domestic league, but they were effectively international matches in the minds of the people. And there was one particular game in the Maximir Stadium where some of the police were kicking out at the fans there was a bit of a riot, and Boban kicked out a policeman in response, and this was televised across Yugoslavia, and Sakin Suste called this a prelude to war. The hooligans involved in the confrontation that day formed paramilitary groups that became involved in rape and murder and genocide in what we know collectively as the Yugoslav wars. So there have been cases in which football has had a real direct involvement and connection to violence. So I want to just pause a minute and look at some key terms. And I'd like you, just with the person next to you, to just ask them what they think a fan is. I'll give you 30 seconds and I'm going to pick on a few of you and you can find out what your mates told you. Okay?
What do I think a fan is? Someone that supports an idea or a team or a musician or something that just kind of like follows the best way. Kind of probably unbeknownst to themselves sometimes why you would follow a team that you know, like I support Liverpool, I know Liverpool. So in other words, just support the best way.
Okay, right. Sorry to bring it up, we haven't got both the time. Can I ask what the conversation was about here? Any key terms that were?
Obsessive, fanatical,
okay.
And outside of logical thought in terms of your interest in something. I think that's where we're
yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. Anyone, when the word obsessive was mentioned, there was a nod there. Was that part of your conversation?
We were just, he said fanatical, and I was like, no, I'm not fanatical, but I'm a Liverpool fan.
Right.
And Monster fan, and he is fanatical, he said, yeah.
Okay. So, if we were to ask Google, which is not always a wise thing to do, if we were to ask Google what a fan is, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, they say someone who admires and supports a person, sport or sports team. And the example that they give, more than 15,000 Liverpool fans attended Saturday's game, which, like, unless that's a European away game, is not a particularly impressive number watching it. But the fact that they not just mention sport but football shows the kind of connection. When we think of fan, we almost always think of sport in that context. But it didn't start in that respect. If we look at the etymology of the term, which isn't just the definition but the derivation, it's linked to place. There's a kind of religiosity in this context, an excessive enthusiasm, intense uncritical devotion. You might know a fan who perhaps embodies that in how they support their given teams, to be extremely zealous. But it didn't become part of our terminology for how we talk about sports until the 1860s, and it was actually an Americanism. Now, Richard Giulianotti has produced a typology of fans, because you might say, well, what's a fan? If you claim to be a fan, who's to tell you you're not? But if you're a match-going fan who goes to every game, you might look at someone who just watches it on TV and go, well, you're not a fan. So we might kind of disagree on terminology in that respect. And Richard, one of the terms he mentioned was a follower. Now, this is 2002. If we were writing this now, what would we think of when we think of fans and followers? We might think of, well, how many Instagram followers does a club have? And if we were to take that metric, Manchester City would not be a particularly big team, but Chelsea would be bigger than Liverpool. So that might be contested as well. The terms we use, fans being one, we might think of fan as being an overarching term. Disorder, which might relate to illegal behaviour, that might not necessarily be violent, it might just be antisocial. Hooliganism, which might be definitively violence. Ultra, which might have political connotations. And hoolifan, which is a kind of composite term that Jeff Pearson and I have written about. But I think we can probably agree, and if I was to have more time and go around the room and listen to your interpretations of this term, that the meanings are contested, and so are the implications. Because if I said to you, what's a hooligan? There's no legal definition of a hooligan in British law, and yet there's plenty of legislation which mentions crimes related to British football fandom. So what do we think identity is? Well, I probably haven't got time to ask you the question, but there'll be different subjects that would cover identity. I'm sure politics students in this country and in this university will be asking that question, likewise with sociology. And that's got a Latin root, and it means the same, ident coming from the word the same. And if you have sameness, you must have difference, you must have distinctiveness. And in his influential work, Mills wrote that the process of constructing meaning or identity of something is dependent on semantics and syntax. What something is and what something isn't. And we get our understanding, our meaning, our experience. If you want to know what light is, hit the switch and experience dark. You understand things in context. Now, the world is a complicated place. So what we do to help us understand our place within it is we divide the world into different groups, and that helps build our attitudes, shapes our belonging and our behaviours, the ways in which we're established in our social relations, and that's then internalised in how we relate to people, established by sameness and differentiation over time and space, and it helps us draw affiliation and interaction, help us exaggerate similarities. Now, being a Liverpudlian, if I'm in anywhere else in England apart from Liverpool, and I open my mouth, people notice. And due to the kind of biases that are, you know, put forward through the British media, it's not always a positive outlook they've got on Liverpudlians. I think that's the politest way I can put it. And I come to Ireland and it's just a breath of fresh air. Because no one, in the whole of Europe for that matter, no one has these kind of preconceived notions. But due to how Liverpool people are represented within the national press, it's entered into the, I suppose, the national narrative, a certain stereotype of Liverpudlians, and that enables people within sport context to attribute biases. Now, Pete Millward has said that we inhabit multiple identities, and we might do that. We might be a particular gender, a particular religious affiliation, support a given football team, and these identities can't intersect, and we can switch different versions of the self on. We all act a certain way within a university building that we might not act outside it. When I spoke to my 2-year-old daughter on the phone this morning, I wasn't talking to the way that I'm talking to you now. We switch on different versions of ourselves, and we use personal pronouns to give an indication of our identities. Now, I'm married to an Irish girl, and when we got married, despite the fact she's got a couple of degrees in sports psychology, she had no real interest in football, and I didn't really know anything about rugby, and she quite liked rugby. And being a proud Liverpudlian, I'm very proud of my city, but I'm not really patriotic. So I didn't have a country, and she didn't have a football team. So we made an agreement that I was going to support Ireland in the rugby. So I took her to see a couple of Six Nations matches. I'm getting dangerously close to understanding the rules of that sport. And she supports Liverpool. So if I come home from a match and she says, "How did you get on?" I'm like, "Whoa, do you mean how did we get on?" And just by the terms we use, you know, the us and the we is our team, and the them and the they is perhaps a rival. And we can see this as well in the context of Northern Ireland, can't we? The names that we give to people might shape our understanding of the background which they might come from, the schools in which they go, the sports they play. How many Protestants growing up in Northern Ireland would have played Gaelic sport over the last 30 years? Okay, so we can have an association between a particular sport and a particular identity. If they're a Rangers or a Celtic fan, might they have indicate something about their religious affiliation, or at least their background and identity as well. And this becomes evidence in how we shape where we live. This for me is, it could be anywhere in Northern Ireland, but this to me is a demonstration not just who is welcome, but who isn't. I would argue that as an outsider. You can argue with me on that. I'm not Irish. And if I was to go down the road and see 3 different colours painted on the curbs, you would say this is something that kind of goes both ways. Perhaps if we were on our way to a particular city, whether we know it by the prefix Londonderry or Derry, just the terms we use, this is politics in paint, and identity is represented through this. We see this in different parts of the world as well. And that football club and its relationship with the other has had a definite impact on politics and identity in this country. I'll move on from there because I know this is sensitive subjects. So I think identity is not static, it's like language, it's like culture, it's fluid, it's subject to renegotiation, intervention, it's fluid and it's complicated. Here you've got 2 brothers, one playing for Ghana and one playing for Germany in the same World Cup fixture. And it helps us to affirm and express our identity in the context of given sports teams. So that's a banner which you probably can't see from where you're sat, but it says, "We're not English, we are Scouse," which is a pretty accurate representation of how I see my own identity in that context as well. Now this is, "We're not English, we are Scouse." This is a manifestation of Mills in 1959. What you're not and what you are. So rivalry and meaning come from this. Now I played for Gillingham, which is a really small team in England for a couple of years, and we played Gillingham. Gillingham played Millwall away on a Saturday, and on a Sunday the first teams played against each other. So all my age group went to Peacefield to watch the first team play. And Millwall fans, their famous song is what?
No one likes us.
No one likes us, we don't care. And they sung with the Gillingham fans, no one hates you, no one cares. Because if you don't have a rival, you don't have meaning. Now at 12:30 this Saturday, Crystal Palace will play Brighton. And that will not be a 3 o'clock kickoff, because in the mid-1990s, they realised we don't have a rivalry. They invented one with each other. It gave them both a bit of meaning. And now that's a fairly hotly contested match. Just a fairly innocuous development of a rivalry, and there's been hooligan behaviour at that as well. So we can legitimise and disseminate ideas, sometimes religious, sometimes national. Here you've got 3 Bali players, both the 3 of them showcasing their religious identities through a celebration of a goal. And this is, for me, a manifestation of the idea that you don't have to rely on uniformity to have unity. Right? You can be unified without being uniform. But this is a reality. And when we think of football, we don't tend to think of pictures like this. We tend to think more of pictures like this, which is the Bulgarians, and I'll build towards the film that I'll show on these particular hooligans later in the paper. So, really briefly, I learned on the work of John Hewson, who is in the office next door to me, he's a professor at UCLAN, and I undertook a really extensive ethnography with Cardiff City fans between 03 and 06, and it was mostly covert, and that a couple of key gatekeepers knew who I was, and the rest just assumed I was a lunatic, and I just left them. I didn't have to throw a punch, I had to take 1 or 2, but I was able to do a really long and pretty decent piece of research through that. Now, whether I'm making a film, or doing a lecture, or writing a paper, I always interview people, and I'm going to showcase an interview with a couple of lads at the end of this presentation, and I rely on gatekeepers. So John Sugden, who's a Scouts professor from the University of Brighton, who I mentioned earlier, he also wrote the book Scum Airways, which is published in 2002. Fantastic insight into engaging with kind of criminal activity in, I suppose, organic cultures. And gatekeepers are really useful. Now, this book was written by Sean Duffy, and Sean is a mate of mine who travelled around the world and found the best derbies. And I'm not talking Barcelona, Real Madrid, I'm talking the derbies where it's not the friendliest, shall we say. And on the front cover, he put the Železnica fans, which is one of the 2 teams in Sarajevo. And circled there is their kind of main lad, if you like. And I got the opportunity, through the gatekeeper of Sean Duffy, to meet this fella and make a film on the Sarajevo derby. And because I had access to him, everyone else kind of gave me the respect and stayed on my way, basically. Gatekeepers are absolutely vital. And the film, hopefully, will kind of give an account of that. So, I'm going to take a step back again, and I'm going to tell you how football's developed. This is in 1 slide and pretty quickly, so try and stay with me. If there's historians in the room, you're going to argue with what I'm going to say, but I'm the one at the front and the other one sat there, so we'll keep it like that, hopefully. So, we don't know much about how football started. There are ancient civilizations that played sports with a kind of something like spherical objects. But what we do know is that kind of the 14th, 15th, 16th century in England, they played a folk game of mob football, which was quite violent, between 2 sides of a place. They still play it once a year up in the Orkney Islands and in Ashbourne in Derbyshire as well. And it would be 2 sides, perhaps farmers against fishermen, or 1 side of a place against another. And it would take all day, and it would be quite violent. And if we fast forward on from this period to the public schools in England, who are absolutely pivotal in developing the regulations of sports as we know them today. If you had a couple of lads that wanted to fight in the public school system where the pupils were struggling with their behaviour, so the staff would just say, okay, if you want to fight, no problem, but we'll condition that. We'll draw off a section, and you can only fight in this place for only this amount of time. So they conditioned it with rules. And they did the same with what became known as football, and that became differentiated from the code, association football and rugby football. The FA were formed in 1863, different forms of governance developed, and clubs were established, beginning with Sheffield FC from 1857, and they became businesses pretty much straight away. If you're a wealthy landowner from the 1850s onwards, this is a town, right? In the middle you've got a bit of a green space, okay? Now a wealthy landowner who owns this space recognises there's a few people over here that are quite good at this emerging game of football, and lots more people over here who aren't. They want a pint and they want to watch. So what we'll do is, and this is mostly male working class people by the way, this wealthy landowner will build a structure around it which keeps people in and keeps people out. And as long as what he's charging them is more than what he's paying them, that's the essence of football business. So, you know, I say to my students, when did football become a business? And they said, well, when the Premier League was accepted in 1992. Really, it had business principles embedded within it from the 1860s onwards. Now, different clubs were established, competitions, the FA Cup from 1871 and the Football League from the 1888 season, and that duality of competition and knockout and a league structure was copied all around the world. And grounds were built on a kind of ad hoc basis. You know, it wasn't like, you know, grounds like Leicester and Southampton, these soulless bowls that's built it, you know, purpose built at one time. We built a stand when we got the money, bit of success, we built as we went, and these were not fit for purpose by the end of the last century. Communities were established. Now I've got a fellowship at a university in Barcelona, and I go and see Barcelona play once a year, and the fans there, they call them the sausage, or sometimes they call them culé. Now culé is Catalan for arse, because when you walked in the kind of 1930s, when you walked into Camp Nou and looked up, all you would have seen was a load of arses. So the language reflects the local community and local culture. So from the 1930s onwards, we established European competitions. Then we had the Second World War, and then there was kind of re-establishment of those from the mid-1950s onwards. And then something really pivotal happened in the 1960s. For about 90 years, English fans had only watched the team play at home. And then there was a change in the structure of the working week, meaning that from 12 o'clock onwards, people could go away from home for the first time. And they weren't going on their own. They were going in groups. They weren't hiring a minibus. They were on the trains. They weren't behaving. They were on the island smashing places up. And they'd turn up to a stadium, and there wasn't an away section, so that didn't exist. So they were getting in the home end, and then there were altercations between groups of supporters. And eventually, over time, what did the British authorities do?
Segregation.
They segregated. Now, they didn't do it in rugby league. Same working class demographic watching the game. Now, if you watch the grand final between Leeds and St Helens, they're sitting together at Old Trafford. But they segregated within football, and that created that spatial demarcation of place, created the dynamics for escalation and for violence. So if I go to Anfield when it's empty, if I go for a meeting or whatever, I look across at the away section, and that's like an embassy in foreign territory. You know, I look at it, I've never been in it, I don't know what it's like. You know, and that essence of it not being our place, it's someone else's space within our home territory. And from the 1970s onwards, travel became more accessible. People started going away to watch the team in Europe, and the casual movement was started with a load of Liverpoolians who were successful at the time, going into Europe, relieving some shops of their merchandise, forgetting to pay for it, and then selling it to the people back home, and that builds a culture. So if you hear the phrase football casual, it started in Liverpool from about the 78 season onwards. And hooliganism became rife in this time, which, you know, the violent elements of football cultures. I mean, I've seen every team to play league football in England this century play, 107 of them, and every single one of them has got some kind of hooligan element to it. And there's usually a label associated with that, and a culture built up as well. We had 3 tragedies in the 1980s, which I haven't got time to dwell on too much, but the responses to them shaped the way in which the next kind of generation of football unfolded. The Taylor report, written after the Hillsborough disaster, completely served to change the way in which football was watched. There were 76 recommendations made, and the most significant of which was the move towards all-seated accommodation. And that didn't mean that standing was dangerous. I mean, that's a direct quote from that report. Standing is not intrinsically unsafe, but there was a recognition that there had to be a different dynamic for how people watched football, and what was chosen was all-seated accommodation. So what we had over the next 20 years was a marginalisation of tennis culture, an eradication of violence, and an increase in a different demographic of football supporters. They wanted to change the grounds, that cost money, tickets became more expensive, and they wanted to attract a different demographic. And what you did is, for the high profile games now, for, you know, let's say anyone plays Millwall away, what does that do to the demographic of people who watch it? The people who've got a couple of daughters maybe think, I don't fancy that. And the people who want to go with all the mates think, I do fancy that. That concentrates the demographic and the problem of football hooliganism. And that really is a manifest of how football fandom used to be before the change in the demographics there. So crowd behaviour and control is developed over a number of years, and this relates to moral panic. So I'm going to try and explain moral panic as I see it using emojis, which is, I feel like it's quite sad doing this, but anyway, hopefully at least it might be memorable. So in a football context, let's say you've got a deviant act or some criminality. A football fan involved in a violent altercation. What happens? The police get involved and he gets arrested. And I picked my gender identification purposefully in that respect. Then we have a journalist who sees this altercation, who writes about it. Perhaps there's cameras there and they put it on TV and maybe more latterly on the internet. Then we have a degree of shock from the people, whatever that looks like, the amplification of the deviancy. And then we have laws written, usually after a high profile tragedy or after a sports mega events. Then we have increased powers for the police. Anyone who's watched football in Scotland over the last 10 years will know exactly how problematic those changes can be. And then we've got an increase in surveillance with football banning orders and even people having to hand the passports in when their team play abroad. So you have this kind of full circle. So, and one of my PhD students, Matt Hall, who's at Bristol Law School, his work looks at the responses, the legal response to football disorder. Now, from 1985 onwards, we stopped talking about football fans as sport fans. So all the legislation is football, not sport. So you can be in a stadium on a Wednesday night and watch a game of football, and you're not allowed to drink and be in viewing area on the pitch. The following night, a rugby team can play there when you can. So the legislation for football is totally separate from 85 onwards from the legislation for sport. And not only that, there was a causal link in the minds of lawmakers about alcohol being an explanatory factor in football violence. And the first act of 85 started that 20-year campaign was called the Football Spectators Act, in brackets, control of alcohol. Football fans became quite conscious of the terminology. The NCIS, believe it or not, got involved in this, the National Criminal Intelligence Service, and they categorised fans as either A, B or C. A is peaceful, B is not too sure, and C is a hooligan. And the Everton hooligan, Andy Nichols, wrote a book, and on the front wrote the shocking confessions of a Category C hooligan. Some of these lads know the law particularly well. There were advances in policing, some of which was more successful than others, and we had the displacement of hooliganism. They didn't want to be caught, so they would fight away from stadiums. We had questionable proportionality of the law and how it was utilised by authorities and the extent to which this might have curtailed civil liberties. Now here's a couple of examples of perhaps arrests that shouldn't have been arrests, and I'll read them out to you. These are the arrest sheets. Singing, this is in Reading city centre, that hotbed of criminal activity. Singing Crystal Palace songs in the street and jumping around in the road following a football match. It was terrible behaviour. This one is at the Manchester derby, throwing a fruit pastel at an away fan. So here you have, is this really, does this warrant an arrest? I'm not really sure. Now this particular match, this is the favourite derby I've ever been at, and we actually lost. So this is Liverpool playing at Everton in the FA Cup about 12 years ago, and you know it is the shock derby. Now every 10 minutes, Everton claim that they're going to move to a new ground in a new place, and they're all very excited, and then it never happens. And at this time, they were going to move to a stadium in Kirby, which is outside the city limits. And for reasons I won't go into, the people of Liverpool called people from Kirby shock robbers. So a message went out, this is pre-social media, on text messages saying, wear 3 pairs of socks tonight, and we're going to throw them at the players. And that's exactly what we did. Now, I did it myself, so technically, lock me up for being a hooligan. Because in the legislation, throwing a missile is, you can get arrested for that. And the police looked at it and they were like, they didn't really know what to do. And the players were like, what's going on? And all the non-local Liverpool fans in our section did not have a clue what was going on. This was a very local language being spoken by Scousers in the grounds, Liverpool against Everton. And the Everton fans opposite were looking at us and they were going, you've got to stay fair play. And that's why that's my favourite derby. But this kind of plays on the kind of disproportionate response of the police and the legal system in the UK. Now this is pretty common. Any kind of big high profile match you'll go to, you'll see a ridiculous number of police surrounding a relatively small number of so-called hooligans. They'll pick them up at the train station, they'll march them to the ground and march them back again, which if you're in Newcastle is not far, so that's not too much of a problem. But if it's in Liverpool, it's a pretty uncomfortable walk up Scotty Road to Liverpool or Anfield for a set of away fans. And that breeds this notion of being kind of anti-establishment and anti-police in that respect. Now, most football fans and most football games occur without any violence happening. So if you want to see violence, I'm not saying you do, but if you did, you're likely to encounter it in a nightclub, not a football club. But yet the legal response is really quite different to that. One of the exception being this game I saw at Old Trafford, when 7 Liverpool fans were involved in the longest fight I've ever seen. They unveiled the Liverpool banner at the front of the Man United end, and literally I was probably 3,000, there was a match going on there. Apparently we were just turning around looking at the fight going on up ahead of us. Now this was an exception rather than a rule, but when these fights happen, they play into the mythology of football hooliganism. And you know, when videos of that shown throughout the world to give the indication that these things still happen. So I'm going to focus now on a few key questions that Martin's asked me to look at. The rituals connected to the phenomenon. I think I've probably embedded some of those within this, but the Leicester School, Eric Dunnan and colleagues have talked about the symbolic interactions between football fans. I think travel is imperative. If you get the train to a football match, you usually consider it to be fair game as a football hooligan. In Scotland it's slightly different, they have a football bus mentality just because they don't quite have the infrastructure to be able to travel on the train perhaps as readily. Clothing is absolutely vital. And I was at a derby, the worst derby I've ever seen, on Saturday, which was Hamilton Academical against Motherwell. And right in front of me, I was in the home end, 7 or 8 lads who couldn't be more than about 12, all dressed in hooligan clothing, just copying the older generation of fans that they kind of looked up to as part of that culture. And then there's the altercations with the fans, but more so with the police who separated the two ends there on Saturday. And sometimes, in the way that a cat will do a particular act to showcase where the cat has been, with football fans do with stickers, right? And some of them are less polite than others. This is a really good one. Martin will appreciate this. Created by immigrants, refugees welcome. This is a well-known sentiment at Glasgow Celtic. And yesterday morning, I was leaving Preston train station and I saw this one. This sign, by the way, was only up 2 weeks ago. And there's a Wolves fan who's put a sticker there. And there's another sticker there which has been crossed out. So there's this practice of saying, yeah, we were there, and there's a sticker. And another practice of saying, yeah, they were there, and we're going to get rid of the evidence of that. And this is really, is this football violence? No, it's not, but it's what football fandom looks like kind of in the modern era. So where does football violence happen? It was traditionally in stadiums. It's kind of been dislocated now, but there's still been organised fights, and the networks develop around this. Most English football fans will support the national team. So if you take, for instance, that little trio rivalry, Leicester Derby and Nottingham in the Midlands, if England are playing away and kind of 7 fans from each of those teams goes to watch them, if they're playing Germany or Poland, there's a common enemy and they'll join up and they'll fight against the Poles. But if they're playing France, who don't want to fight, they'll fight each other in the bars. And this isn't, you know, an unusual incident. This happens still at most England away games. So these networks develop, and then those fans have each other's number. They can arrange to meet up in matches the following season. So when does it occur? The notion of being to or from or at a game is a bit awkward. It's fine in domestic matches, but I mean, yesterday I flew out of Birmingham Airport to get here, and I was surrounded by Wolves fans. Now, are they involved in a confrontation on the way to that match? Is that football violence 2 days before they play a game in Espanyol, or is it not? What if a gang of lads go on a stag do and fight against another set of lads? Football might be the motive, but it's difficult to prove what's violence and what's football violence. So who instigated? This is I won't say predominantly male, I'd say entirely male. You know, I've watched a lot of football in a lot of places and I've never seen a girl involved in football hooliganism. It doesn't mean that they might not be on the bus with a lot of hooligans at some stage, but in terms of the actual involvement in violence, this is a male domain. And the young people would consume this phenomenon, so they would watch the videos on YouTube, they would watch the films that are not the most accurate representation of what's going on, and they'd be involved in local networks. So a lad in their year at school, as a 16, 17-year-old, is going to watch the team play, and he's noticed that they're dressed in a certain way, so he wants to copy that in order to fit in, to kind of follow in the next generation. In terms of why it happened, I think there's layers of motivation. At Cardiff, I noticed this was a status thing. If people were going away with the Soul Crew, which was the name of the hooligan firm there, on a Saturday night, they'd be treated differently. They had a bit of a swagger about them because they were one of the boys. That was how it was seen. And for a lot of people, they enjoy it. It's fun. And for a lot of people, it's identity. It might be politics, not so much in this country and not so much in England, but in parts of Europe where it can be quite political and right more than left in that respect as well. It can be culturally motivated, there can be racist tendencies, nationalist, and this reflects a kind of hegemonic masculinity as well. And how does it relate to broader issues? And I did a PhD in this area because I knew it would be badly researched, and I knew I could basically go the match for 3 years and write about it. And I didn't really want a career researching it, but I made that decision. And I saw that it had been quite badly understood in terms of how it was written about, and quite badly policed as well. So some of my work has looked at that. And in terms of the impact on a kind of an impressionable youth, it's really easy for a young lad of 17, 18 to get caught up in the wrong crowd, to get arrested and get a criminal record at 18, when really the kind of behaviours that they've exhibited probably doesn't warrant that. And it's only the label of football which is really attributed mostly to that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the case study now, and then I'm going to show the film. I know rattling through this, there's quite a lot to take, and I fill every second with quite a lot of words, so thanks for staying with me. But I wanted to talk to you about Bulgaria today, and we can think of this again in the context of the identity framework that we've mentioned. But I've talked about hooliganism as being about conflict, but in different parts of the world it's actually a form of unity, because there are brotherhoods between hooligan firms that have basically mates in different parts of Europe. So at CSK Sofia, the example I'm going to mention now, they're friends with Partizan Belgrade, and you know the ancient notion of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they take on the enemies of Partizan Belgrade, particularly Red Star Belgrade. And Sakhan Suster, who wrote that influential paper I spoke of earlier, declared the Balkans to be a key place to understand some of the linkages between some of the aspects on the board there. So the national team play in England in 2019, and the racist behaviour that was exhibited by, I'd guess, 100 fans in a stadium where there was maybe 40,000. So we are talking a minority, but we are talking a definite exhibition of that kind of behaviour. Now, I'm not to tar everyone with the same brush. If we talk about typologies, then CSK probably have fans, which are just kind of normal people, if you like, who go to the match. And then they have the ultras that get involved in some of the pyrotechnic displays and some of the tifos, like this one, which is quite curiously a Star Wars. I'm not sure what the deal was there. And then the hooligans who are there really to fight. And the animals are probably the most notorious football hooligans in Europe. They would certainly claim that. And I got to meet them and make a film on them in 2014, which I'm going to show you a version of that. And to explain that, I need to talk about Liverpool's relationship with Bulgaria, because how would I get to sit in a room with them and for them to even speak to me on a level like we did? Now, the game was in 2014, and it was played in the Bulgarian capital of Sofia, but we were playing against Ludogorets, who were a small team. So it's basically going to be a lot of Levski and CSK fans in the stadium. Now, 10 years earlier, I did that journey from Budapest to Sofia and saw Liverpool play against CSK Sofia's rivals Levski, and there were about 600 of us who made the journey, and about 2,000 CSK Sofia fans came into our end and basically protected us from getting battered. It's literally what happened. It was a fairly rough night. Now, the reason they did that is because Liverpool had played CSK in 1982 in the European Cup quarter-final. We were the champions at the time. I say we, I was one at the time. There's the personal pronouns again. And CSK beat Liverpool, and you know the Irishman Ronnie Whelan talks about playing behind the Iron Curtain that night in front of 75,000 fans in that part of the Balkans. But some Liverpool fans went, and CSK Sofia saw Liverpool as the kind of pinnacle, so adopted them as the team. And I remember meeting a Bulgarian in 2004, I was 23, who had an entire back of Liverpool tattoos. And I was like, wow, this is next level stuff. So when I eventually went to meet the animals, this was the first sight of the ground. So this is CSK's ground, and the first thing I saw was the name of the animals, the hooligan group, and a swastika. And I turned to a lad who kind of came to meet me, about 6'4", still fairly close to me, and he just said, show me your questions. And I just motioned to my temple and said, I haven't got none, mate. And I got this out of my pocket, and I said, this is my camera, and that's my cameraman, pointed to me mate next to me, said, are we going to do this or what? And that's not me kind of exhibiting bravado, that's exactly what happened. And the reason I felt comfortable to do that was a friend of mine who has kind of contacts in the hooligan game, and he's got friends in Bulgaria, and I'd messaged him a few weeks before this game, and I'd said, listen, I'd quite like to make a film on these lads, and he's like, I'm not even asking. I said, just show them a couple of clips of films I've made, and if they want to make a film, then we'll do it. So he sent it back, and then I got ill just before the game, and I was in hospital, and I rang the lad I was going with and said, I'm not going to be able to make it, and he's like, come on, just come. And I said, all right, but I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to make this film. So I rang my mate and said, all right, the film's off, and he's like, whoa, so you've got to do it, lad, they're expecting you. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So the dynamics of the conversation shifted before it even started. These lads wanted to be YouTube stars. So that's why I was able to be right direct to the point as soon as I met them. And the film, you can watch it on YouTube. It's the full version is 34 minutes. Now I was there 45 minutes. 11 minutes I was there weren't being filmed. And I know it was that tight because at 1 o'clock that day, 2 hours later, I was at the University of Sofia giving a lecture on this subject. And there was a senior member of the faculty who stopped me in the middle of the presentation and said, why are you talking about Bulgarian hooliganism? We don't have a problem with racists and hooligans. And my cameraman, who by the way found out he was the cameraman that day over brekkie when I handed him the iPhone and said, you're filming this, he'd never even been there at the University Lecture Theatre. And he was at the back and we just kind of smiled at each other. You know, just a total lack of understanding what's going on, a lack of degree of public consciousness, I suppose. So I've spoken for long enough. I'm going to put the film on now, which is 7 minutes, and then I'll do a quick conclusion. At CSK's ground, they call it Siska Football Club in Sofia. This is the most successful club in the history of Bulgarian football.
We are the soldiers, go ahead Reds. I'm forever faithful. Since I was a child, CSK lighted the fire in my heart. Every time we meet a rival supporter, we have a good fight with them and we take off all their articles like shirts, sweaters, scarves, whatever we take from them. After we beat them, we put on the street to be ashamed.
So this is one of the animals.
This is the holy ground.
From Siska, leading us out onto the pitch. Are you leaders of this hooligan group?
Some of the top boys.
So, you know, we see signs around the ground for, you know, swastikas and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, politically, where does the club stand then?
Most of the supporters are far right.
Grow up in the country, in the regime with the communism, there's no way to like this. So many people are with the far right. Especially in Bulgaria, there's problems with the gypsies. Everyone hates them because they don't work, just living on the back of the normal people, taking the benefits. Also, there's problems with the Muslims. Yeah. We are only 2,000 kilometers from this Islamic state. Muslim minority in Bulgaria, and they're starting to be more active. And the fans are the people who are stand against this. Last February, there was a march in Plovdiv with us and the other football firms involved.
Yeah. If there's a common enemy, you'll be together.
Yeah, of
and if
course.
there isn't, you'll fight each other.
Yes. If they want to live their lives with the Sharia laws, they can go to fucking Middle
They're shit
East or
country.
whatever. Not coming here to change our country.
This is our country. They want to live here, they must live by
They
our
accept
rules.
our rules.
So, how many Muslims or Gypsies or the others, are they still tiny minorities? Because when we were on the way
Gypsies and
in,
Muslims are not tiny minorities anymore.
okay. Well, when we were on the way in, we were told there's only one mosque in Sofia.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the
It's
Muslim
one
population is
mosque,
quite
yes.
small. And we were also told to watch out for the Gypsies.
Yes.
So are they like the lowest of the low? Is there a ranking order of how you see people?
You know what was the funny thing about the only mosque in Sofia?
Come
All the Levski Sofia clubs are based around the mosque.
What if any immigrants came here? So
Where?
if, like say, do you have any black fans or anything like that?
No
Just
way.
No.
No black, no gypsies, no immigrants,
No.
nothing.
No gays.
No, fuck no gays.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance for gays. No, Levski supporter and gay is the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You make that connection in your mind. Yeah.
No, it's not the gays.
We are homophobes.
Yeah.
We don't like them.
One
This is
day-
what's killing England.
See-
The multicultural.
One day maybe it's gonna be changed here, but
Multiculturalism is
we will
what's
be
going
one died years after we passed away. It may change.
And you,
we are
and you
alive,
say
no way.
you say you'll be long dead. But what about the next generation? Do you have like young
Yes.
Yeah,
cultures
we have
coming
them.
through?
Yes.
Yeah, we have.
So we have lots of laws to prevent hooliganism, right?
Yes.
Introduced after disasters and problems. Do you have laws here
Yes, we
for
have
that?
laws.
We have
have
laws,
laws.
but we don't.
They
care.
can come to your house and take you 6 o'clock in the morning. We have 5 guys in the jail at the
No.
moment for
For
nothing.
nothing.
For
Yes.
no
6 months now.
6 months. No evidence against
No
them.
convictions, no nothing. Just stay in the
nothing.
jail.
Do you think in 10 years you'll be able to come here with the flares and fight against the
Because of
fans?
the
I hope
UHC,
so,
even
yeah.
now,
It-
even
it
now
will be
when
not
we
possible.
start the pyro, everyone is masked and covered.
They
That
can
would
give
be
you
normal.
1 year ban if they catch you with
The police
flyer.
stands here,
Right.
takes photos
But
of the
it's-
people who hold
So-
The flares.
the
The
flares,
flares, yeah.
and after the game they wait for us at the exits and arrest us.
Right, okay.
But
So you must always be ready with a mask?
Yeah, I always have a mask on me.
Like
Even
now?
now. Yeah, like
Yeah.
now. Just like in my hood. Like this. Always and everywhere.
the last derby game played at Club Ground was in 2011. We smashed the whole place.
Yeah.
The police kicked us. The police was fighting
War
us
on the streets.
and, kicked us out of the ground.
Where else in the of the Balkan region is like this?
We are
Serbia.
Bulgaria or
Serbia is
Serbia. Out.
the same.
are you allied with them politically? Do you think are you similar to Serbia?
Not
We're
politically. We are
friendly
friends.
teams, friendly fractures.
We have a big friendship with Partizan Belgrade.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we are CSK Sofia animals, you know.
Yeah.
The strongest
We are
group in
always-
Bulgaria and probably on the Balkans.
So if you side with one fan group like Partizan in Belgrade, does that mean that you won't like Red Star?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
had huge fight with Red Star 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We hate
After
them.
one of the derbies on the way back in the gas station, 17
service
of us
station.
beat the shit of 60 of them.
And if you're friends with Partizan, you're not going to be friends with Croats.
No.
So there's problems there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had the fight before the night before the game. We had fight with Croatian fans. It's a smoke bomb left from the last game.
Happens to have a knife on him, like.
We're going to try to light it up for you. Ima nešto. Knife. That's it. Mane, evo. Talk. We do whatever we want. Here it is.
Yeah, it seems to be the case because it's not normal for me as an outsider to walk into a ground, shown around by the fans, meet the legendary managers, you know, go where you like. You
If
seem
you
to
want-
have a lot of power in this.
If you
in
want,
this
we
club.
can take you now to the director of
You want to
your
meet the director? You want to meet the boss?
You know,
Yeah,
the
well-
doors are always open for us.
This is the owner of CSK.
The owner of CSK.
You're from Liverpool, yeah?
Liverpool, yeah.
Welcome.
Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure. Okay, thank
So, as the owner, you have a good relationship with the fans here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think these fans are incredible.
Yeah.
Because listen, this guy from Odogorets owner, He controls the football union and many referees.
Corruption is huge.
He has money because he controls two big pharmaceutical plants and pay money to many of them.
Yeah.
We have big problems with this.
You have problems with corruption in this Bulgarian football,
very
yeah.
serious, very serious.
Bulgaria corruption is on every level.
On every level, yeah. Match fixing as well, and
Unfortunately,
saturation.
on governmental level, sorry to say. Last week, they prepare every single referee to kill us. We make almost rebellion here. You can imagine it was a big fight. Without them, nothing is happening.
Yeah.
Because last year, some very bad guys tried to put our crop to finish it.
Yeah.
Broke it.
It was almost finished.
Without them, it was impossible to restore the club.
So without the animals, without the fans of Siska, there's no club here. Is that right?
No. This guy is number one. This guy is number one
yeah.
in the standings now.
Very shocking, you probably would agree. Just to finish really briefly, hooliganism is fundamentally a male domain. This is a gender distribution of football fans, not hooligans but football fans, and from UK right across most of Europe, and it's showing that around a third of today's football fans are female, but in hooligan terms I would argue that it's virtually 100%. And for a lot of people, hooliganism is about identity and it is about enmity, and the rivalries that they engage in, the violence they engage in, is motivated by perhaps politics, perhaps culture, perhaps an enjoyment of violence. And the phenomenon is widespread, but I would argue that it's limited in terms of its severity. And when we have instances like the Euro 2016 problems between England fans and Russians in Marseille, that was really the exception rather than the rule. And I think there's been a disproportionate response, generally speaking, to hooliganism, but there will always be a kind of cultural resonance of that phenomenon, and I will argue that it's never going to disappear. Thanks very much.